So I probably should have made this video before we've had both of these events, but you know what they say, it's better late than never. So, most of the festivals and events throughout the calendar in Britain and around Europe have a pagan origin. And unless you're some sort of Christian nutcase, I think you'll be pretty aware of this, with Christmas, Easter and Halloween. But you're probably wondering why I'm bringing up Fireworks Night or Fawkes Night. It seems a little bit unconnected at first, and to be honest, it might not be connected at all. I might be wrong. I'm not an expert, but I've been suspecting that Fawkes Night was simply a Protestant perversion of the old Samhain or Halloween pagan custom. And I'll try and explain this as quickly as I can. Now, before I start this video, I just want to make it clear that I am totally aware that Samhain is not the proper pronunciation. It's actually Samhain. However, I've been reading the documents and books and so on for so long and always said Samhain in my mind from way back sort of when I was still 16, 17 years old. So I know it's Samhain, I'm just going to say Samhain because that's just how I would interpret it, being English and not Gaelic. Because Samhain, majority of it anyway, and Halloween is an old Gaelic tradition, predominantly. There was, in the Germanic world, something called winter finding as well, and there is a lot of similarities there as well. But the name Halloween comes from the Christian adoption of the original European pagan festivals, which occurred all over Europe. It wasn't just a Germanic or a Celtic thing. It was all over Europe. But I think majority of our understanding of Halloween comes from the more northern European traditions. But yes, it's known within the Catholic Church today as All Saints' Day, which is held on the 1st of November, and All Souls' Day, which is held on the 2nd. Now, I could be wrong, but I think the reason why in Britain in general there's more of a Celtic connection to Halloween rather than the Germanic one is because of the influence from the Celtic Church in Anglo-Saxon England. A lot of the Celtic Christian ideas got embedded within the early Anglican Anglo-Saxon Church because of the missionaries that were coming down from places like Lindisfarne, which traditionally were Celtic Christian. But to be totally honest, from my English pagan perspective, the difference between what is called winter finding and what is called Samhain in modern times is negligible. The general themes of both were the remembrance of ancestors and loved ones, sacrifices or libations made to the dead and to the gods, and also the scaring away of evil spirits, which is the likely origin of guys in costumes and trick-or-treating and stuff today. Now, the old calendar in use by Northern European pagans and even early Christians was based on the lunar solar cycle, and whilst it seems a bit weird to us today, a day in their society began with the setting of the sun from the previous day. It's a bit strange, but it explains why All Saints' Day in the Catholic Church is held on the 1st of November and not the 31st of October, and why perhaps we have Christmas Eve marked on our modern calendars. It seems a bit strange. Why would you have Christmas Eve? And obviously the reason was, years ago, many years ago, they began the Christmas celebrations on the sunset that occurred on Christmas Eve. So if we actually apply our modern calendar, we should actually celebrate Hallow Day, and it should occur, like the Catholic Church, on the 1st of November. In the same way that the day began with a sunset, the year also began with the sunset, if you like, of the power of the sun. Halloween marked the beginning of the end, if you like, of the sun's power, and so it also marked the beginning of the new year. And to our pagan ancestors in ancient Britain at least, Samhain was seen as the most important day of the year, and the festival itself probably goes right back to the days when structures like Avebury and Stonehenge were still in use some 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. And I'll explain that very quickly because it is a bit tenuous, but hopefully you'll see what I mean. So the earliest structures at places like Avebury that were used in a religious manner were long barrows, like the one found at West Kennet. Long story short, the barrow itself was filled with the bones of the dead, and the narrow chamber was aligned exactly with the sunrise that occurred around May Day. It has been theorised, judging by marks and clues left around the Neolithic sites, that this represented a death and rebirth cycle, with the sun's masculine energy impregnating the womb tomb of a Mother Earth goddess. We don't know much about their worldview or their rites and rituals that they performed, but given the fragments that we have left, it wouldn't be inconceivable to think that they believed that this would aid the reincarnation of their loved ones. I'll cover this in more detail in a future video, but it's worth mentioning that at Halloween, that same solar alignment will occur again, which perhaps gives us a clue as to the importance of both life and death in this cycle had for the early Britons. Hopefully you can see then that Halloween is not some recent commercial import from America, and it's been a part of British culture for centuries, if not millennia. For instance, there was an early form of trick-or-treating in Britain called guising, for instance, where the poor or destitute would go out and go and sing for something called soul cakes. They were like a hot cross bun type thing. And this is still done in Portugal today, but obviously we still do it in a way with trick-or-treating. And the jack-o'-lantern, which they carried with them, was not originally a pumpkin, since they're not a native vegetable to this part of the world. They were done with turnips or swedes, etc., and would have been brought along with the singers. The lantern itself, during Christian times at least, represented a soul being trapped in purgatory. There are also plays put on across the UK, all over villages, in pubs and so on, called mummers or murmurs plays. And these were, although they had entertainment value, their central theme was of death and rebirth, which obviously has Christian connotations, but it does hark back to those old pagan meanings as well. So it's very interesting that we still had that. And I believe, not so much in the UK, but I think in America they still put on these plays in schools and so on. So that is where the origin of a lot of those plays comes from. Even as late as the late 1800s, Queen Victoria would visit Balmoral Castle up in the Cairngorms in Scotland to burn effigies of, according to the news article from that period in time, witches, ogres and elves. So I think this is where we get the connection between Halloween and Guy Fawkes. The old pagan tradition of having a bonfire to ward off evil spirits in the winter darkness evolved into a Christian practice of burning the evil spirits in effigy form directly. So when Guy Fawkes was caught in 1605, allegedly loading barrels of gunpowder under the Houses of Parliament, he and his men weren't burnt to death, like what many people would presume, given that we burned the guy on the bonfire. He was actually hung, drawn and quartered, not burnt on a pyre. So why do we burn an effigy of Guy Fawkes every year? I suspect that the date of 5th of November, being so close to Halloween, was seized upon by the English Puritans as an excuse to change the meaning of Halloween. It was originally a Catholic festival that was still being practised up and down the country, so the Puritans used this as an excuse to sanctify it, or to make it a state-sanctioned festival that had less to do with religion, because the Puritans were basically nutcases who hated anything to do with celebrations. Obviously, Cromwell later on, who was a Puritan himself, was even trying to ban Christmas. So you can see the kind of religious extremism that was involved within the Puritan faith. So the government passed the observance of the 5th of November Act, and the rest is history. I'm not the only one who suspects the link between Halloween and this observance of the 5th of November Act. Anthropologist James Fraser said very much the same thing in his 1890 book, The Golden Bough, which has been quoted extensively actually over the years with things to do with finding the pagan origins behind many of our current festivals. As I said before, though, you have to remember that at the time that this occurred, Puritans were quickly gaining power in England, power which would culminate with Cromwell's victory and England and Ireland's enslavement to Dutch moneylenders. There is, of course, the conspiracy theory that the gunpowder plot never even happened, and that this is all just an elaborate scheme by Puritans to create suspicion against Catholics in England to further their own political aims, which clearly worked. Either way, whether it's Halloween or Guy Fawkes, it's nice to think that the basic custom may have been going for thousands of years here in the UK, and you could say that burning effigies of spooks is kind of a tradition of ours. Now, for whatever reason, many are reporting that Fireworks Night in the UK is losing popularity in favour of Halloween. There's probably a few reasons for this. One the public today are probably more sympathetic towards Guy Fawkes than they are to Parliament. 2, terrorism today is a daily concern that we're reminded about constantly. And 3, we're getting this strange cultural feedback loop from America where our own culture is being re-injected back into the UK, albeit after quite extensive American commercialisation. I suppose it goes to show just how resilient cultures can be to change, and that, given a little bit of time, they will reinstate themselves, albeit if they are a little bit changed along the way. But in my opinion, Halloween should be the most sacred religious or spiritual time of the year. It's supposed to be a time where we pay homage to those who we've lost, dead loved ones, and a sign of just a time to just kind of sit back and think about life in general. Unfortunately, because of the commercialisation, it's kind of regressed into sexy zombie costumes and kids throwing eggs and being antisocial, firing fireworks at each other. So there is a worrying lack of respect or reverence for the dead these days, which I'm sure you'll agree with me, whether you're Christian or pagan. So I think we really should try and take back both Christian and pagans. I'm not really bothered by the religious aspect, but we really should try to re-inject the meaning of reverence of the dead back into this festival and take out all the commercial bullshit. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching. Your likes and subscriptions would be very much appreciated, but even more so, I'd really appreciate your comments. So if you have a comment on this, please leave it below. And if you will be so kind, I will join you in the next video. See you soon.